Montana Territory. June 1883. Steam escaped from the locomotive like breath from a dying beast as it rolled into the depot near Miles City. Metal wheels screeching their final complaint against iron rails. Victor Ellison touched the edge of his weathered hat, piercing blue eyes sweeping across the wooden platform. Surprises weren't his preference. Yet here he stood, awaiting a bride mail-ordered, sensible, reserved, someone capable in the kitchen who valued solitude, and wouldn't mind the remoteness of his ranch along the Tongue River. That's exactly what his payment had secured. The woman who emerged from the railcar bore no resemblance to his order. She appeared younger than anticipated, perhaps 22, with determined posture and a defiant jawline that challenged anyone who dared test her. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a loose arrangement, streaked with sun-bleached gold at the temples. A simple blue traveling dress, dusty from the long journey, clothed her frame as she grasped the small hands of two children, twins, around 5 years old. A boy and girl, both carrying weary expressions in their eyes. Victor's expectations crumbled like a punctured water vessel. The woman surveyed her surroundings uncertainly before her gaze found him. She approached with a confidence that caught him unprepared. "Are you Victor Ellison?" she inquired, her voice unwavering despite the locomotive's roar behind her. "That's me," he replied hesitantly, his attention fixed on the children. She released their hands and extended hers in greeting. "Temperance Elwood. These are Daisy and David." Victor kept his hands at his sides. "You made no mention of children." "But I did," she countered with quiet firmness. "My correspondence from 2 months past explained my widowhood from last winter. I wrote that my husband's death left me with twins. I understood if that altered your decision." "That letter never reached me." She nodded curtly, jaw set. "Then we both face unexpected circumstances." His eyes returned to the children. The boy pressed close to his sister while the girl studied him as if determining his threat level. He examined Temperance again. Beauty wasn't hers in conventional terms, nor softness, yet something in her gaze made his chest constrict. She possessed strength and fire, asking for nothing while preparing for rejection. Victor stepped backward, running fingers through his beard stubble. "You're not my original request." "No," she agreed, "but I'm what arrived." Silence stretched between them, the kind that settles when futures hang uncertain. Then Victor moved forward, grasping her hand beneath her fingernails and all declaring, "Come along then. We'll wed before sunset." Temperance stared at him in amazement. "You still wish to proceed?" "I stated I required a wife," he said. "You're present. You show courage. You stand independently. That suffices." She held his gaze briefly before offering a single nod. "Very well." The justice of the peace was a bent-shouldered man, reeking of whiskey, clutching a worn Bible. The ceremony was brief. The children waited silently on the courthouse steps. Afterward, Victor loaded one trunk into his wagon bed before turning to her. "I haven't prepared for children." "I have," she replied. "I always prepare." He assisted her onto the wagon seat, then climbed beside her. The children settled among bags and belongings in the back. The ranch road proved rough and dusty, wheels kicking up clouds as the sun hung low, casting golden light across the prairie. Neither spoke for some time until Victor broke the quiet. "I lack experience with child rearing." "I possess it," she said again. "I don't expect you to become their father immediately." He studied her, then truly studied her. "Did you love him? Their father?" She confirmed with a nod. "I did. He was gentle, though not resilient enough for Montana winters." Victor let that settle between them. "And you?" she asked. "Ever wed before?" "Never. Trust came hard for me." She offered a slight smile. "Yet you trust now?" "I trust what I witness." "You shed no tears, made no pleas. You stepped from that train prepared for battle if necessary. That reveals more than any letter could." She turned her face toward the wind, letting it cool her cheeks. When they reached the ranch at sunset, the house stood sturdy, an two-room cabin with a porch and a chimney that leaned slightly askew. A barn, chicken coop, and corral sat nearby with cattle grazing in the distance. Temperance helped the children down before studying the dwelling. "It exceeds my expectations. You expected worse." "I always do. Prevents disappointment," he observed. Her again how she straightened her shoulders, kept one hand protectively on her son's head. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Always," she replied. He chuckled, surprising himself. "Good. I slaughtered a rabbit earlier. There's bread too, though it might be stale." She smiled faintly. "I've consumed worse." Inside, she moved with natural ease. She located the skillet, seasoned the meat, and positioned it over the fire. The children sat at the table, whispering together. Victor watched them, uncertain how to proceed. Temperance glanced up. "You needn't speak to them yet. Let them adjust to your presence." He nodded and took a seat. That evening, after the fire died 2 embers and the children slept in the smaller room, she joined him outside. The full moon illuminated the landscape like a benediction. She folded her arms, gazing toward the horizon. "You could have returned. Me to town. I know, yet I didn't." He looked at her. "You claimed you weren't what I ordered, but perhaps you're what I required." She faced him, her expression softening. "Are you certain?" "I will be," he said. "If you remain, I'm not leaving." He nodded once. Then, before either could reconsider, he leaned down and kissed her, not hurried or desperate, simply natural, as if he'd been waiting without realizing. When he pulled away, she stayed close, her palm resting on his chest above his heart. "I suppose we're truly married now," she whispered. He smiled. "We always were. Now we're beginning to believe it. For the first time in years." Victor Ellison felt something in his life was finally falling into place. The rooster announced dawn before light touched the windows, though Temperance was already awake. Cold basin water stung her wrists as she washed, then braided her hair heavily down her back. She moved through the main room's stillness, careful not to disturb the children sleeping on folded quilts in the corner. There hadn't been time for another bed, and she hadn't requested one. Outside, the sky resembled iron. A gentle breeze stirred the grass tops, while dew mingled with last night's fire smoke. The barn door stood partially open, revealing a man's silhouette bent over a saddle. She entered the doorway. "Do you always begin before sunrise?" Victor straightened, wiping his hands on his thighs. "Cattle don't follow clock time." She leaned against the frame. "What requires attention today?" He hesitated. "Plenty. An ox damaged a fence post 2 nights ago. Need to ride out and inspect the southern boundary. Maybe set traps by the creek. Something's been disturbing the coop." "I can repair the coop," she offered. "The garden needs weeding too. If I give David and Daisy beans to sort, they'll stay occupied." He nodded, reaching for his bridle. "You're comfortable out here alone?" "I wouldn't be here otherwise." He studied. "Her work doesn't frighten you." "Work never scared me. Most people find this life too vast, too silent. It unsettles them. I once lived where neighbors surrounded me, could hear their arguments through thin walls. Silence suits me better." He stepped aside so she could take the shovel from the wall. As she passed, her sleeve brushed his arm. Neither moved away. "I'll bring back whatever I catch," he said. She nodded. "I'll have supper ready." The day progressed slowly and steadily. The children sat on the porch with a bowl between them, sorting dried beans by color, her idea to keep idle hands busy. She knelt by the coop, sleeves rolled up, dress hem darkened with earth. The fox had dug cleverly and shallow. She packed the soil firmly and arranged flat stones along the bottom, her palms roughening with work. By mid-morning, perspiration clung to her spine. She stood and stretched, glancing toward the hills. No sign of Victor yet. Inside, she checked on the children, then retrieved her small ledger. She'd recorded every item they'd brought: flour, lard, half a jar of molasses, 2 pounds of salt pork, and the sewing kit she'd carried since Kansas. Turning the page, she began listing necessities before the first frost. She paused only when Daisy tugged her skirt. "There's a bird trapped in the chimney," the girl said, eyes wide. Temperance followed her inside. Frantic fluttering echoed within the flue. She knelt at the hearth, carefully opened the damper, and reached in slowly. The small, soot-covered creature struggled until her hands closed gently around it. She carried it outside and opened her fingers. It hesitated momentarily before darting into the open sky. Daisy watched, arms wrapped around herself. It was frightened. "So was I," Temperance said, brushing soot onto her apron. "But it's free now." The girl remained silent, just leaning into her side briefly before returning to her brother. The sun was moving westward when hoofbeats announced Victor's return. He carried 2 rabbits by their legs and a small pouch of herbs over his shoulder. He didn't speak as he dismounted, simply handed her the game and watched her expression. "Catch anything else?" she asked. "Found a rusted trap, sprung and empty. Might be coyotes. We'll need better wire and more salt." He nodded. "I'll ride to town next week." She glanced at the pouch. "What's that?" "Marsh mint and wild onion. Thought it might improve the stew." She blinked. "You gathered herbs. You said you'd have a pot ready. Figured I'd try to make it worth eating." She took the bag, hands brushing his again. "You plan ahead. I try." That evening, the stew simmered gently while the children played with sticks behind the house, their laughter rising occasionally like bird calls. Temperance stirred the pot, added the herbs, and tasted with a wooden spoon Victor had carved years before and nearly forgotten. He watched her from the porch steps, elbows on knees. "You always know what to do," he said. She set the spoon down. "No, I don't. I just do what needs doing." He nodded. "Same thing." She turned to him. "Do you ever tire of being alone?" He didn't look away. "I did, but I didn't realize it until now." The air between them felt different, less accidental, more intentional. Inside, hearthlight cast long shadows. The table held supper's weight, and the children leaned against each other, half asleep before emptying their bowls. Later, when quiet returned and stars hung low, Temperance stepped outside again. Victor was already there, sharpening a blade with slow, careful strokes against the whetstone. She sat beside him, knees touching. "Daisy wept last night," she said. "Didn't want me to hear." He glanced at her. "Did you comfort her?" "No," she said. "I listened until she stopped. Sometimes that's sufficient." He nodded. "You understand when to remain silent. You too." They sat that way for some time, the stone sound and wind the only things between them. Then he set the blade down, turning slightly toward her. "This isn't what I envisioned." "Neither did I," she said. "But I'm not regretful," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Neither am I." He reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. She let him, their fingers interlaced as if they'd been waiting. No words after that. Just the sound of 2 people settling into something that felt like the beginning of belonging. 2 weeks passed before the children stopped, startling at slamming doors. They no longer whispered when speaking in the house. Some evenings after supper, Daisy sang to herself while folding the rags Temperance used for washing. David began following Victor around the yard, quiet but observant, always observing, like a puppy studying the older dog before daring to bark. One afternoon, clouds gathered low and gray over the hills. The wind turned sharp, tugging at the eaves and pushing the scent of rain through open windows. Temperance stood from kneading dough and wiped her hands on her skirt. "Storm's approaching," she said. Victor moved without responding, already bringing saddles in from the porch and securing shutters tight. He turned to her once the last was fastened. "Ever see hail this time of year in Kansas? Once, broke every window in town, buried wheat under ice. He nodded. We'll keep the chickens in the barn tonight. By the time the first drops fell, the sky had gone nearly black. Daisy and David huddled near the hearth, each clutching wooden toys Victor had carved from scrap pine. He didn't mention the gesture, and Temperance didn't offer thanks. But that night she braided leftover muslin and left it on the table beside his plate. A sturdy lead rope knotted with care. The storm broke just before full darkness. Rain pounded the roof like fists while wind howled through log gaps. Victor stood near the door, rifle in hand, though there was nothing to shoot but sky. Temperance sat beside the children, one hand resting lightly on David's shoulder. Ever seen wind flatten a tree? He asked, without turning. I've seen worse than trees bend, she said, and still rise after. He looked over then, and something passed between them, not soft, but steady, like two people who had weathered enough storms to know what would endure. After the storm passed, the air smelled of crushed sage and wet earth. The world outside was slick with silver, and the silence that followed made you listen for your own heartbeat. The next morning, Victor and David walked the property together. When they returned, Victor carried a broken fence rail over his shoulder, while David clutched a single feather-long and striped a hawk's. Maybe they're learning each other, Temperance said later as she swept the hearth. Victor looked up from repairing a leather girth. You think that's positive? I think it's something, she answered. And something's better than nothing. That evening, she brought out black thread and canvas torn from an old flour sack. What are you creating? He asked. A map, she said, for the children. Something they can hold this place, the hills, the creek. Something they can trace and come to know. He watched her stitch the first lines, her fingers deft and certain. You always work with your hands. I can't think properly unless I'm doing something. Your husband teach you that? No, she said. He preferred books. I preferred mending. We didn't match in many ways, but we tried. He remained quiet for a while. You miss him? He asked. She didn't look up from the cloth. Sometimes, not the man himself, but the idea of being safe beside someone. He didn't speak again until she folded the cloth and set it aside. Then he said, You feel safe here? She turned to face him. I think I'm starting to. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows up the walls. Daisy and David had fallen asleep on the braided rug, curled back to back like kittens. Temperance rose and knelt beside them, pulling a quilt over their shoulders. When she returned, Victor hadn't moved, but his hand rested open on the table. She took it. Neither spoke a word. Outside, the wind had stilled. The stars were sharp and clear. For the first time since arriving, Temperance felt the weight in her chest ease, not gone, but no longer hers alone to carry. Morning light came pale over the ridge, casting long shadows across the wheatgrass. Temperance stood at the window, holding coffee in both hands, watching Victor lead the buckskin mare from the corral. His stride was steady, coat unbuttoned, despite the early chill. She leaned her shoulder against the frame and allowed herself to study him in the quiet. Behind her, the twins stirred. She didn't turn. They could dress themselves now without coaxing. Victor had begun teaching David slipknots. Daisy had taken to tracing the stitched map with her fingertips every evening before sleep, whispering landmark names like memorizing prayers. By the time she stepped outside, Victor had already saddled the mare and was tightening the cinch. Heading far? She asked. Not far. One of the cows dropped her calf overnight. Want to see if it's standing? She nodded once. If she lost it, bring the hide back. He glanced up. You want it for tanning? I want it so the children understand not everything survives. He studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. I'll bring it. She didn't look away. You ever bury livestock? Too many. He swung into the saddle and turned the mare toward the rise. She watched him go, then turned to the coop. The hens had begun laying again 3 eggs yesterday. One soft She reached into the straw, fingers practiced, and came away with 2 warm ovals. Inside, she cracked them into the skillet and let the grease hiss. Daisy came to her elbow, hair still tangled from sleep. "Can I help?" Temperance handed her the fork. "Scramble slowly. You don't want to tear them." After breakfast, she packed a satchel with dried apples and cold beans, then summoned the twins to the porch. "There's work near the spring," she said. "You're coming. Bring your shoes." The trail up the hill was narrow and rutted with old wagon grooves. She carried the hoe, while David carried the pail. Daisy picked wildflowers as they walked, careful to choose stems without ants. At the spring, they found the soil damp and rich. She showed them how to turn it, how to press seeds into hollows with thumb flats. Daisy crouched beside her. "Will it grow?" "Not if you doubt it," Temperance said. David frowned. "How can a seed become something big?" She looked at him. "Same way a person does. Give it time. Give it care. Don't expect it to look identical every day." They worked until the sun climbed high, then sat in cottonwood shade and ate apples with juice-sticky fingers. When they returned to the house, Victor was already home. He stood in the barn doorway, shirt damp with sweat, a fresh bandage wrapped around his forearm. Temperance crossed to him without a word and took his arm gently. "Which one caught you?" "Cow kicked when I pulled the afterbirth. Calf's alive came breech." She unwound the cloth and inspected the wound. "You cleaned it?" "With pine pitch." He nodded. "Boiled some, packed it in." She rewound the strip with sure fingers. "You always do this alone?" "Most times." "Well," she said, tying it off, "you're not most times anymore." He met her eyes. "You mind that?" "No," she said. "I mind you thinking you still have to." That night he lit the lantern early. The children were outside turning stones for beetles, and the wind had shifted again, this time from the north. He stood at the window, hands braced on the sill, watching the sky turn flint-colored. Temperance set a tin plate on the table behind him. "You ever lose your way out here?" He didn't turn. "Only once. Winter of '79. Whiteout came fast. I followed my horse's tracks back, but I never found the fence line. Did that frighten you?" "It humbled me." She stepped beside him. "You ever feel lost lately?" He looked down at his boots. "Not since you came." She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "I thought I'd feel like a stranger longer. You don't." "I feel expected. Not like someone ordered, just someone kept space for." He turned fully. "Then I didn't know I was." She reached for his hand. "Most people don't." He leaned slightly, not all the way, just enough to close the air between them. "When I hear you move around this house," he whispered, "it sounds like something settling right." They stood that way a moment, the lantern burning low behind them, the breeze slipping through the window with sage and dust scents. She didn't pull away. He didn't let go. Outside, the children laughed in fading light, and the day folded itself into the kind of evening that didn't need anything mended. The first frost came early, curling garden leaf edges and silvering the fields before sunrise. Temperance stepped outside with the quilt shawled around her shoulders, her breath a pale cloud in still air. The chickens hadn't ventured from the barn, and the horses stood quiet near the fence, steam rising from there. Inside. The stove kept the main room warm enough to keep the twins from burrowing beneath their quilts too long. Victor had risen earlier, and from the axe striking wood, he was near the east shed. Splitting the last cottonwood for kindling, Temperance brewed chicory and poured 2 tin cups, then stepped out to where he worked. He stood with sleeves rolled, the axe wedged deep in the log, his breath steady in the cold. "You should wear gloves," she said, offering the cup. He took it without hesitation. "Can't feel the grain through leather." She leaned against the fence beside him. "I've been thinking about winter." He drank, then nodded. "I've stored enough feed for the cattle. Shed roofs are patched. We should manage. I meant the four of us, she said. Close quarters, long months. It's different from summer. He set the cup down on a stump. You worried? No, she said. Just want to ensure we're not pretending this is easier than it is. He stepped beside her, his boots crunching frost. I've never pretended with you. She looked up. Then let's clarify something. He waited. I came here because I had nowhere else to go, but I stayed because I saw something in you that made me believe this life could be rebuilt not just for me. He didn't answer immediately. Then he said, I've lived quietly for years because I didn't know how to share a life without losing myself. But you never asked me to surrender anything. You just came in and put your hands to work like you already belonged. She reached for his wrist, traced the scar edge where the cow had kicked him. I don't want to belong beside you. I want to belong with you. That's different. He covered her hand with his. Then let's stop calling this a marriage of necessity. He tipped his head forward, pressing his brow to hers. The silence between them was full of breath and frost and something warm rising slow and certain. I want to court you properly, he said. Even though we're already wed. She blinked, startled. What does that mean, Victor? It means I want to know what makes you laugh when it's just us. I want to dance with you in the kitchen when the kettle's boiling. I want to hear you sing, if you ever do. I want to make this more than survival. She closed her eyes. I haven't danced since before the children were born. Then we're overdue. That night, after dinner and washing up, Victor lit the lantern and pushed the table back against the wall. The children were already asleep, curled together under the new quilt Temperance had pieced from scraps. The wind outside had stilled. The fire burned low. He held out his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. There was no music except the mantel clock's ticking and the soft creak of floorboards. He moved slowly, one hand resting gently at her waist, the other warm in her grip. She let herself follow, let her feet find rhythm. Her cheek brushed his shoulder once, and she didn't pull away. They swayed like that slow and steady till the lantern guttered low. The next morning she woke to biscuit smells. Victor stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, flour dusted on his forearm. You've been busy, she said, smiling. Figured if I'm courting you, I ought to feed you occasionally. She laughed, soft and surprised. That day he rode into town with a list she'd written in her careful hand. Flour, kerosene, needles, and new boots for Daisy. He returned just before dusk with a bolt of calico. She hadn't requested burgundy, with little white sprigs. For you, he said, placing it in her arms. Not for mending, for making something new. She traced the fabric's edge. You remember the color of my old shawl? Hard to forget, he said. It was the first thing I noticed, as days shortened and nights pulled them close. The cabin grew warmer not from fire alone, but from how they moved around each other. He carved a shelf for her sewing things. She taught him how to mend torn linings without puckering seams. The children began calling him by name less and calling him P.A. more. One evening, as snow swept soft against windows and stew simmered thick on the stove, David climbed into Victor's lap with a book and asked him to read. Victor cleared his throat, voice rough from disuse, but read anyway, halting and slow. Temperance watched from the rocker, hands stilled in her lap, heart full in a way she hadn't known since before the war, changed everything. Later, after the children had gone to bed and the fire was low, Victor knelt beside her chair and laid his hand over hers. I want to give you a vow that means something, he said. Not just what we said to the judge that day, one from me to you. She turned her hand under his, fingers curling around his. Then say it. I vow to stand beside you in every storm, to hold what you carry without asking you to set it down, to raise these children like they're my own, not because I have to, but because I want to, and to live beside you, not ahead or behind, for as long as this land lets us. Her throat tightened. Then I vow to walk with you in all of it. Not for what you've done, but for who you are. I vow to be your home. They rose together, hand in hand, and crossed to the bed as the fire dimmed. No words left, none needed. They shared warmth the way some folks share stories quietly, reverently, piece by piece. By spring, the garden had taken root again, and the chickens laid regularly. David had learned to carry water without spilling, and Daisy had begun humming while she worked a tune all her own. Victor built a cradle from spare pine and carved a tiny wildflower into the headboard, though no one spoke of why just yet. One evening, as the sun dipped behind hills and painted the fields gold, Victor and Temperance stood hand in hand on the porch, watching the children chase the dog through tall grass. He turned to her. "You ever think we'd reach this point?" She leaned into his side. "Not once, but I wouldn't trade it for anything." He kissed her temple, slow and sure, and they stood that way as light faded, not afraid of what was coming next, because they had chosen each other, wholly and without condition, in a land that demanded everything of you. They had discovered the rarest thing of all, a home made not of wood or stone, but of love, steady, quiet, and true.